Welcome to Urban Strategy in the Present Tense. I believe we're going to be recording this session for our YouTube channel. And I want to welcome everyone and thank you for your patience while we got set up. My name is Andrew Zitcer. I am the program director for the Urban Strategy program at Drexel University, part of the Westphal College of Media, Art, and Design. And we're hosting this Urban Strategy in the Present Tense webinar series. And this series is powered by the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University. What's going to happen today is I'm going to introduce our fantastic guests, and then I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions, and then we'll determine if we have enough time for Q&A from the audience. But it's my hope that we'll have enough time to have some robust questions that we'll take in the chat from all of you. I want to introduce my guests. I'm going to start by introducing Bruce Katz, who is the founding director of the Nowak Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Previously, he served as inaugural Centennial Scholar at Brookings Institution and as vice president and director of Brookings's Metropolitan Policy Program for 20 years. He is a visiting professor in practice at the London School of Economics and previously served as chief of staff to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and staff director of the Senate Subcommittee on Housing and Urban Affairs. Katz co-led the Obama administration's Housing and Urban Transition team. He is co-author of The Metropolitan Revolution and The New Localism, How Cities Can Thrive in the Age of Populism, editor and co-editor of several books on urban and metropolitan issues, and a frequent media commentator. So thank you and welcome, Bruce.
Great to be here.
Now, I also want to introduce our friend Della Clark. Della Clark is president of the Enterprise Center in West Philadelphia. Della Clark's vision for minority entrepreneurship is not about counting the number of successful businesses, but about making businesses count. Since 1992, Ms. Clark has brought this vision to fruition as president of the Enterprise Center, an organization at the forefront of the greater Philadelphia region's economic entrepreneurial ecosystem, guided by the mission to cultivate an interest in minority entrepreneurs to inspire economic growth in communities. The Enterprise Center accomplishes this by accelerating the capacity of minority business enterprises to compete in any marketplace through business education, management support, access to capital, and procurement opportunities. Motivated by her belief that business success is a team sport, Ms. Clark epitomizes the core values of collaboration and economic growth that drive the outcomes of the Enterprise Center as the operator of a Pennsylvania and New Jersey MBDA Business Center and a U.S. Department of Transportation Small Business Transportation Resource Center. Under Ms. Clark's leadership, businesses have obtained more than $870 million in contracts, $209 million in financing, and created 3,221 jobs through the Minority PA Business Development Center. Minority and women-owned businesses have secured more than $18 million in loans to start, grow, and succeed through the Enterprise Center's Capital Corporation. The Enterprise Center, Clark leads efforts to create the Dorrance Hamilton Center for Culinary Enterprises, a 13,000 square foot food business incubator and hub of community health and nutrition resources in West Philadelphia, now in the 10th anniversary. I'm going to stop there so we have time for a lot of questions, but welcome to you, Della. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so one of the things we're here to talk about today is the 52nd Street Business Corridor, which is near and dear to my heart, being a resident of West Philadelphia myself for over 20 years. And I wanted to ask if, Della, you could tell us a little bit about 52nd Street, its history, its present state, and its hoped-for future.
Well, I will celebrate 31 years in January here at the Enterprise Center. And Andrew, I have to be honest with you that probably about 20 to 22 years of those 31 years, I did not want to work on 52nd Street, right? Because I knew the magnitude of the work once we decided to put our baton up and say we were going to work there. And so as I look back on the history of 52nd Street, it started out as a very vibrant corridor when it was primarily occupied by Jewish merchants. And the Jewish merchants actually lived on the second floor of each one of the buildings. And they cared about 52nd Street, and they would go out every day and clean the sidewalks and prepare for that day. And then when they decided to retire, the majority of the ownership went to Asian retailers. And the Asian retailers do not live in West Philadelphia, live above the second floor. So many of the second floors are unoccupied. And one of the challenges with 52nd Street is that the egress to the second floor was behind the rear of the store, because the merchants would just, at the end of the day, go up the steps to their second floor. So as we think about changing it, it would require substantial transformation of the buildings in order to add egress from 52nd Street. But over the years, 52nd Street went into a spiral downhill, right? And that it became known as a low bargain discount corridor. And it lost its appeal to the average buyer, right? It is still the most populated and traffic-oriented corridors in the city of Philadelphia, but it comes with a lot of barriers associated with it. And so now it is somewhat edgy, is the definition I would describe. And so as you hear Bruce and I speak during this session here, it's really to smooth those edges out and transform this corridor again.
Thank you, Bruce. Did you have anything to add on 52nd Street?
You know, what's interesting is relative to a lot of other corridors in Philadelphia or in other parts of the country. This is a corridor that's fairly occupied with business. I mean, it is, as Della describes, certain kinds of businesses, but you know, this is also West Philadelphia. So when you look at the broader growth in the city, you know, there's so much housing and job growth in West Philadelphia, because not just because of Penn and Drexel and the hospitals, but because of Philadelphia really finding its niche within gene and cell therapy and precision medicine. So, you know, there's a lot of challenges here, but the starting point is a lot better than other corridors, either in Philly or other cities.
Mm-hmm. So Andrew, West Philadelphia has always been known as a bedroom community, right? And but some of the challenges that we have at 52nd Street is the income wages of families, right? It's relatively low. It's average of about $39,000, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons we have the discount and the low bargain type stores on 52nd Street. But we think that there's a real opportunity to transform it into more of an experience center, an experience corridor with restaurants and arts and culture versus trying to keep up with the low bargain discounts.
So when we think about 52nd Street, it's a corridor that faces kind of opposing challenges. On the one hand, as you said, Della, it's edgy. There's poverty, marginalization, and public safety challenges. And on the other hand, we're experiencing residential gentrification in the blocks surrounding the 52nd Street corridor. So how do we get from the 52nd Street we have today to the one that we dream of? And how can we do that equitably? I know that's the work you're trying to engage.
It's called investment capital. So when you look at low wealth communities, historically, they receive program dollars, right? And when you only get program dollars in a community, this is what happens, is that poverty and decay and lack of investment comes in. And so I think this is a real moment in our history and time for Philadelphia, as well as, you know, working with Bruce, commercial corridors around not only in Philadelphia, but in America, which is why we worked on this playbook, is that this is a template and a model for other corridors. But these corridors, not only 52nd Street, but others need investment capital.
Can you say more about the difference between investment capital and program capital, and why the program capital is insufficient while the investment capital is transformative?
Well, I hope there's not any funders listening, because I blame them for program capital. Okay. And when you think about program capital, which primarily goes to nonprofits, you have to, in most cases, design a program in order to be awarded the dollars. And then you have to build capacity, usually hire a project director, coordinator, and it's around specific goals. And typically there's not any follow-on capital. So it's not really a sustainable model. Whereas investment capital, which can be a combination of public, private, individuals, accredited investors, you're able to acquire real estate, you're able to put together sustainable income out of the real estate, and think less about social programs and more about investment capital. So it can be used as an attractor to bring new businesses, to enhance the corridor, you know, to really look at number of ways that you can make the corridor vibrant in a different way.
So it's about rebuilding a market.
Yes, but you also need to rebuild the infrastructure with the investment capital, new sidewalks, streets, you know, changing the bicycle lanes, foot traffic, all of the above, planting trees, environmental, making it clean and safe, you know, occupying the second floor so you can bring the residents who can spend dollars. You know, you cannot revitalize the lower levels without the top, and you can't revitalize the top without the lower levels.
Mm-hmm. So this starts to get us towards your investment playbook that I know you've all been working on. And Bruce, I wanted to ask you, you have a national and an international presence. When did you first come to the table to partner with Della on 52nd Street revitalization? And then how does this investment playbook that you've been putting together factor into some of that work?
Well, we've been talking together for years. I mean, it's partly because what Della has built with the Enterprise Center is remarkable. And I'm going to throw out a bunch of acronyms because we live in an acronym world. I mean, she's an MBDA center, she's a CDC, it's a CDFI, and earlier this year she became an SBIC, which means that she can attract and deploy investment capital. So most neighborhoods in the United States, communities in the United States, don't have an intermediary with that kind of firepower. And as Della says, I mean, the bulk of what goes on in most urban neighborhoods in the United States is really about services or low-income housing. And I don't want to knock any of that, but what we really need to do is begin to focus on building Black and Latino business across a multitude of sectors. I mean, Jane Jacobs wrote about this I just happen to have The Economy of Cities on my desk. So, but she wrote about this in 1961, 1962, and she basically was writing about the Bronx at the time and said, isn't it interesting we're getting all these housing developments in the Bronx, hundreds of millions of dollars a pop, but there's no funding really to help a business start and scale. So for a long time, I think we've tilted the playing field around, whether you want to call it community development or urban regeneration, around services rather than business building and market shaping. And I think that's, post-COVID is something we really need to do, given that we saw during COVID how many small businesses were decimated because they tend to be mom and pop, brick and mortar, high touch. So so Della and I have been conspiring for years and we continue to do so.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Della.
So what I'd like to say is that Bruce is my macro thinker and I'm his micro thinker, right? Because I can take and break apart what he writes about. I can talk about it, right? And so we make a great team because he looks at everything from a global and macro, and I can bring it down to a practitioner level, which is why the playbook for 52nd Street is so exciting, right? Because he brings a different perspective and I'm able to translate that at a community level. So Andrew, I can't think of another project that we have on the drawing board as exciting and as the opportunity with 52nd Street, because people will really notice the transformation once we get it underway. okay?
Well, we've alluded to this playbook for 52nd Street. Maybe now would be a good time to show some images and some slides
Yeah.
around
Mhm.
what that we're talking about here. And then afterwards, maybe we can talk about how you're going to put this plan into action. So if we could pull up the slides, that would be great.
Yeah, by the way, this is a tool that's being used by cities around the country because we're in this moment of federal investment and state investment and private commitments around racial equity. So what that requires is a portfolio of projects in particular geographies. It could be a commercial corridor, it could be a whole neighborhood, it could be a city, it could be a county. But this is a project moment in many respects, and an investment moment. So I can start and then I'm really turning it to Della. I mean, it's so next slide. Someone in the chat asked, well, what is 52nd Street? I mean, here's where it's situated, and here's its geography from Malcolm X Park to Arch Street. So it's about 6 blocks, half a mile, 138 businesses. Again, it starts, with a business presence and a highly frequented transit stop, and employs quite a few people, annual sales. But next slide. What Della and her team, really with our team, have put together is a multi-pronged strategy, because when you're dealing with a corridor, when you're dealing with a neighborhood, you're dealing with a downtown, it's not one strategy that's going to help move inclusive redevelopment. It's multiple strategies. So yes, the real estate, and Della should really talk about the fact that in cities today, trusted local intermediaries own very little of the real estate. So it's really critical to get back that control, particularly with a lot of predatory capital moving. And then business support, infrastructure, community development, and housing. This initial playbook, because playbooks are not a report, they're living documents that constantly need to be replenished and constantly need to raise capital. But what we have is about 30 investments and strategies totaling over 160 million across multiple stakeholders and players. So, and that will then beget other investments and other projects. So I might just stop there because I think it's really important to get to the level of specificity and capital stacking, if you want to move the dial, and then treat this as an iterative process where new investors will come in and, action will beget new possibilities, new challenges perhaps, but also new possibilities.
So Andrew, I'll add, starting out with real estate, is that what we have also discovered over time at the Enterprise Center is that the majority of the minority construction firms are small, and many of them through the city and public sector and even private sector are not able to build a track record in order to get bonding and build their cash reserves to get larger projects. And the reason being is that most minorities in America, as well as Philadelphia, come from low wealth families, which means they don't have the assets to set up a proper business with sufficient working capital. So as we think about 52nd Street, we made a commitment that all of our projects and all of this work was going to be done as close as we possibly could to 100% minority construction firms and service providers, including architect, engineers, HVAC, plumbing. And so we purchased 277 South 52nd, and it was a boarded up building. We demoed that particular building, and now the new building is under construction. It's 2,500 square feet with 100% minority participation. We purchased 24 South 52nd. That building will be converted into a food hub and a restaurant because 52nd Street also is a food desert because it doesn't have any healthy restaurants or anything. And one of the things that Bruce has heard me say is that as a nonprofit and a CDC, if you don't control the real estate, it will be very difficult to raise public and private dollars, because one of the first things they want to see is, do you have site control for the dollars that you want to pursue? So we now own 5 buildings on 52nd Street and have 2 that we're working on now to try to get under agreement. As we think about the small businesses, every building that we acquire, we do not ultimately want to own that long term. We actually want to help the small businesses be able to have ownership on 52nd and own the site that they occupy. And whether we will hold the mortgage or we will help them get external financing. So these are some of the ways in which we are trying to integrate business development with real estate and capital and creating wealth also.
So this $160 million investment roughly is a catalytic investment in the transformation of 52nd Street to a corridor that's healthy and thriving. How do you go about, do you need the slides anymore? Do you want to keep going?
No, I think it's enough, but I just want to stay on this slide for one more second, Andrew,
Yeah, go
because
ahead.
There's a lot of talk about equity out of the Biden administration, out of large financial institutions, particularly racial equity in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. I think 52nd Street is an equity test for the country. I mean, if you want to do this, it's not for the faint of heart. You're talking about buying and renovating commercial real estate. You're talking about investing in small businesses, alone and together, back office, et cetera. You're talking about infrastructure, whether it's digital, whether it's public safety, whether it's road improvements, transit, you're talking about community development, particularly around supplier development. So you can build these businesses, and then obviously housing production preservation. And there's a lot of parasitic money out there, so you have to protect it while you're moving forward. So we don't tend to talk about the need for intermediaries like the Enterprise Center that can sit in the middle of all this and match up the capital that projects need, whether it's grants, debt, concessionary debt, equity, tax, with different kinds of capital providers. I mean, this is complicated stuff. So we talk about equity a lot, but I don't think we've really built the community infrastructure in most parts of this country to actually deliver it. What we're trying to do on 52nd Street with Della is deliver it. But this is what it takes. It's not a one particular intervention and all is fine. And there are headwinds here, whether it's the fast growth in West Philadelphia or parasitic investors who are buying up commercial real estate or buying up housing in the vicinity. So I think we need to get to a more sophisticated conversation of this, or else we're just going to have a lot of rhetoric and a lot of frustration, frankly. So we can go back to full screen. Thanks.
So following up on that for both of you, I mean, how do you make the case? You say this is a living document, you're taking this out on the road, you're sharing it with prospective partners. How do you make the case? Is it a moral case for equity, or is it a business case for equity? What is the sort of argument and rhetoric, if you will, that you use to try to convince actors that have not acted on 52nd Street in the last 70 years to come back or come for the first time?
Well, if you think about commercial corridors, they are the front door to neighborhoods. And where you have a vibrant corridor and a safe corridor, you tend to have a safer neighborhood. And so my pitch to potential investors is that if we don't do anything to 52nd Street, it will become an incubator of crime and criminal activities. If we invest in it and we clean it up and remove those edges and transform it, it will be a spinoff and a vibrant corridor that will help the neighborhood and communities surrounding it survive, right? So I don't think we're in a situation where, can we afford to sit back and not do anything like we did the past 30 to 50 years? No, we need to clean it up and revitalize it. And so that's why the Enterprise Center believes this project is so important, because it will become an incubator of crime if we don't do anything.
I do think we're trying to attract either philanthropic or public sector investment that catalyzes market investment or market investment, from the get-go. I mean, African Americans are about 13% of our population in the United States. They're only about 2% of employer firms. And if business ownership is a portion of the way in which we reduce racial wealth disparities in this country. So if we're going to have a serious conversation about this, we need to attract either equity investments or other kinds of investments into small businesses. Now, some of those businesses can serve the local community, and some can be more regional serving, as Della talks about with this experience economy, or some can serve the anchor institutions themselves who are buying substantial goods and services on an annual basis. And now the public sector is buying a lot of services. So I think a portion of what we're seeking here is market capital that is looking for reasonable returns. And that would start a virtuous cycle, I think, and there's a question about the parasitic money out there. I mean, we're in a really different situation post-pandemic. I mean, we are seeing institutional investors, but just general LLCs moving into the residential and corridor markets and purchasing large volume of property. Now on the housing side, that's just because we have such housing supply issues. Single family homes that get converted to rentals is like its own asset class today.
Mm-hmm.
I think the people coming into commercial corridors are looking for flipping opportunities. But in some ways in these neighborhoods, everyone talks about disinvestment. These places are getting capital. It's just the wrong kind of capital.
Yeah.
And so I think we're trying to, change that equation as quickly as we can.
Yeah. Andrew, we just welcome Chase Bank to 52nd Street, right? And it's not a traditional bank branch. It is more of a community-minded branch. And so they have created space inside for the community to come in and learn about home ownership, about business ownership. And so we're going to partner with Chase at this particular branch to make sure that it's integrated into the strategies that we're talking about today.
So knowing that there's these headwinds that Bruce was talking about a few moments ago, that there's the residential gentrification sort of around the 52nd Street corridor, but not necessarily on the 52nd Street corridor, and there's the parasitic capital and the investment capital that's coming in. How do we make sure that this transformation of 52nd Street isn't a transformation that is there for the people who come after, but supports the long-term residents and the Black and brown communities that have been a staple of 52nd Street for a long time?
Well, that's a tough challenge, okay? But I think most of the minorities who occupy 52nd Street, very few own their own place. It's not an asset base for them. It's a rental situation. And typically the landlords are not active, and when they have a problem, they can't get it resolved. What we want to do is to see if we can bring together a group of investors, right, that would support that, whether, through forming joint ventures to do acquisitions. The Enterprise Center is not interested in owning 52nd Street. What we're interested in is revitalizing and transforming it, but not necessarily owning everything. Who we want to make sure own 52nd Street is the people that look like me and that represent the neighborhood, right? And we think the neighborhood will patronize it. And one of the ways that this became a fact for us is that we had an uprising when George Floyd was killed, right? That night there was an uprising on 52nd Street. And what we noticed is that the minority businesses were not touched. The non-minority businesses were destroyed.
Yeah.
So that told us is that if we can make the corridor majority minority, the next uprising, the next killing, we won't have a problem on 52nd Street because they were protected.
So a sense of community ownership and buy-in is necessary for the sustainability of the community over time.
Correct. Correct.
You
So
know, it's interesting,
go ahead,
Andrew.
Bruce.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, this is why it's sort of maddening at some level. No one says to a parasitic investor, who, by the way, are plentiful and offer cash and move quickly. No one says, oh, by the way, are you improving the neighborhood? Or are you, sort of creating sort of a long-term sustainable, I mean, they just act, and they are the dominant actors right now. So here we are with a trusted intermediary in West Philadelphia and along the corridor, basically trying to move the ball in a way that I think is very consistent with what residents have said about the kind of goods and services they want to be able to purchase and the kind of businesses they want to see built in their community and in Philadelphia. But I do think it's just a curious thing. I mean, because I think we've really labeled these places as disadvantaged and disinvested. I don't see that right now. I see large volumes of capital that don't care about anything but returns coming into these communities. And if we don't start acting with scale to reverse this, we're going to end up in a much more difficult situation going forward. I mean, the character of neighborhoods is shifting, particularly in Philadelphia, where it was always a homeowner city. And we're seeing neighborhoods shift from homeowner to renter right now. The federal government's doing nothing about this, by the way. I mean, nothing. And so at some point, this is going to have to be bottom up cities and potentially states beginning to respond, because these investors are coming in, and a lot of bad things, particularly higher volumes of evictions, higher rents, lower forms of home buying. I mean, it's all associated with this. So it's a complicated world. Nothing is ever perfect, but it's not a static world. It's a dynamic world, and most of the dynamism is on the bad side, to tell you the truth.
So how is this the right time and the right moment? How are you being received with this playbook? You said it's being used as an example. It's an equity test for America. Della, Bruce, how are you finding the reception of these ideas as you go out and road test them around the marketplace of ideas?
Well, I'll speak first. We at the Enterprise Center is trying to do two things simultaneously. One is to use the tool, as Bruce said, as an educational tool, right? To educate the elected officials, the public officials, foundations and corporations, and even the community about what it will take to transform 52nd Street. And then secondly, specifically to the foundations and the funders and the investors to use the playbook to try to garner catalytic and long-term support for the corridor. Because we have to come to recognize that when a community is majority minority and it is a low wealth community, there's typically no cash reserve and there's very little assets for collateralization of a loan to acquire one of the buildings that they want to start a business in. And that's where we as an intermediary can stand in and help solidify the challenge that these small businesses and the home ownership face.
Yeah, I think we got a different set of actors here. We got a new governor, and we got a lot of federal money from the American Rescue Plan that has not been obligated or expended. This seems like it would fit within the American Rescue Plan principles, so the state could be a major catalytic funder here, and then that would just have knock-on effects with other banks and impact investors and beyond.
Yeah. Andrew, I have a copy here. I look at it every day, and I'm wanting, it's my job to pitch it and to sell it and to raise the fund. So I'm pretty much driving the initial fundraising for the for 52nd Street. And so as an example, we opened up in one of our buildings we purchased, we opened up a holiday pop-up. It's all small businesses in there. And because they can't afford their own retail space. And what we found out is that if you only an internet-based business, you may not get a sale every day. So really, retailers need both a web-based presence and a retail-based. So we're giving them an opportunity this Christmas holiday to utilize our space. And that has been a very successful project for us. But I will tell you that some of the response we've gotten is, I'm a little afraid to go to 52nd Street because it's a little edgy.
Mhm. So we need to work on all the aspects at once.
Correct.
We had a question in the chat, which was, what can cities do tax-wise or otherwise to thwart parasitic buyers? And I'm just going to drop something in the chat that Bruce sent out, which, Bruce, I believe this was about the report that you did with the reinvestment fund. Is that what you were sending out? So can you just say in a few words what that is?
So this is a report that basically shows for Philadelphia, Richmond, and Jacksonville, the fact that the predatory investors are targeting the most distressed neighborhoods that tend to be non-white, tend to have higher vacancies. You know, we're in a structural change, I think, in the housing market today, where new technology is allowing investors, laptop landlords, wherever they live, to target certain kind of communities where they know they can boost the rents, you know, because there's such a supply constraint. And then you're left with a bunch of absentee landlords, essentially, that don't particularly care. So how do you fight this? I mean, the best way to fight it is to provide acquisition financing so that a public entity, a land bank, or a trusted intermediary could buy housing at scale and protect it. The other thing, obviously, is to inform many of the existing owners about, you know, because they're just getting cash offers on their homes. I mean, all of us, you know, probably are just being hit with text and everything on a daily basis. Hey, you want to sell your house? You know, well, it's these most vulnerable neighborhoods where that's happening to the greatest extent. So there's multiple things the feds, the states, and localities can do to level the playing field and fight back. But the first thing we need to do is, I think, for the national government to say something awry is happening in the aftermath of this pandemic. And some of this goes back to the Great Recession, because the aftermath of the Great Recession, we had incredible number of foreclosed properties. The federal government really, Fannie, Freddie, et cetera, they brought in these institutional investors to snap them up. So they got a taste of a new asset class, and now it's happening, you know, just incredible scale.
So we have a couple of questions coming in through the chat. If part of the problem seems to be investors who don't care about the community, only the bottom line, their accounts say businesses should not count for externalities, only account for debits and credits that can be determined and only for the business. Isn't this the basis of capitalism, one says?
It's the basis of American capitalism.
Yeah. But I just want to remind everyone that the Enterprise Center is a nonprofit. So as a leader, you know, we're not a private for-profit developer. So any opportunities we have will be recycled back, right, into the community and to do more to help small business and help the community. We're not focused just on the bottom line. Certainly we want to be sustainable and have an equitable income to support and maintain the corridor. But this is not about profit for us. This is about transformation.
Right. And you're not a capitalist enterprise in your own way, Della. I mean, you're doing things to make a market and to sustain a market. You're just doing them with compassion and with an effort to sort of see a greater social good, but you're still participating on the same marketplace playing field as others, but just with a different ethos and a different playbook.
Correct.
I want to transition, since we're starting to come to the end of our time. This web series is designed in part to tell the story of how people got where they are today. And knowing that you both have storied and amazing careers as what we call urban strategists, I wonder if you would each take a moment and share with us some career highlights or big breaks that you have when you were coming up for our students who are out there, our prospective students, some moments from your career that you thought were catalytic in bringing you to the place that you are today. And I'll start with you, Della, if you don't mind.
Well, as a little girl, my father was an entrepreneur. And at the time, I didn't know the challenges he was facing, but I could tell by the dinner table. Because when my father would have a good week, the meal would be different than when my father had a bad week. And as I have, became an adult now and working with small businesses, that resonates with me. And I have a lot of sympathy for them because I did not grow up where there was wealth in my household. And so so I think now this is my call to use the experiences from my father and the dinner table in my house to help other entrepreneurs create the wealth that my father wasn't able to do. Because ironically, Andrew, the challenges my father faced with capital hasn't changed very much in the years now that working with entrepreneurs and what they face. So I'm really focused on capital, and I've become a capital revolutionary, not only for 52nd Street, but for the small businesses in general. And I'm putting my voice to it, not only here in Philadelphia and America, because we have to address the capital gap, not only in West Philadelphia and in Philadelphia, but in America.
Thank you for that. Bruce, would you share any moments from your trajectory that helped you kind of figure out how you'd get to where you are today?
I just love the term capital revolutionary. I definitely need to use that to describe what Della's doing.
Andrew, can you tell him that's copyrighted?
Oh yeah, no, TM trademark. So I was lucky when I was growing up to go to public school in Brooklyn, New York, and they had a program where you could basically not go to school but go to work. And anyone who was in public school at the time, I mean, it wasn't entirely clear why we were going to school, to tell you the truth. So I went to work for the New York City Council, and then I got hooked on cities and on public policy, and I never really looked back. And from that, did a lot of political campaigns, went to work for the Senate, went to work for the Clinton administration at HUD. I mean, a lot of my career trajectory was really curiosity driven, but also networks of public, private, and civic leaders, who were mentors for me. And they were constantly saying, hey, you should think about this job or that job or something else. So, but it all really started in high school. And so I was lucky, it was like, it's like what Drexel does now, really. It's like a co-op.
Yeah.
But it was in high school, not in college.
Well, it's important to think about how these early experiences can kind of set us off on the path that we ultimately travel on, and how they can influence the work that we do later on. We have another time for maybe one more question that's in the chat. It says, following the 2008 crash, a number of private foundations, mostly in California, moved their money off Wall Street into real estate directly. If this problem is the supply of capital finance to compete with the predators, is there an appeal to the approximately $1.2 trillion in capital sitting on Wall Street, for example, the Philly-based portion of that, to move it into the mass purchase of real estate, in particular housing? Can we make that appeal?
I think the philanthropic sector needs to understand the kind of market dynamic we're facing right now. And, I think we're going to have to intervene at scale with public capital and with philanthropic capital to sort of counter a lot of this. In addition, to making sure that those new corporate landlords register and are subject to code enforcement, because they're just having a free ride, to tell you the truth. But the fact of the matter is, I think this is the most important for the folks on this webinar to take, is that it is not a level playing field right now. There's a lot of money out there in a supply constrained environment. And we need to understand that in a technology rich environment. So what Della's doing, I think, is really remarkable, to tell you the truth. And I think it's a proxy for so many neighborhoods in the United States, and it can be not maybe replicated, but adapted to many other cities, with capital providers who really do care ultimately about inclusive outcomes for residents and business.
I want to add that I think that, we have a significant amount of crime now, not only in Philadelphia, but other parts of America. And I think, as I said before, these commercial corridors, not only in Philadelphia, but in America, that are dilapidated, lack of resources, lack of investment capital, are an incubator for crime and other activities. And cleaning them up, we should start to see crime decrease, because we bring on new economic opportunities for the resident and surrounding community that doesn't exist today. And my last comment, and this is copyrighted, is capital flows where it knows. So Bruce can't have that one either, Andrew.
I'll keep it safe for you, Della. We have a comment in the chat that says, I would add that, this is from Alan Lindy, I would add that anyone investing in a neighborhood is financially committed to that neighborhood being safe, decent schools, active businesses, increased values of home and rental income. If people are investing in the neighborhood, it's a positive, not a negative trend.
Yes, we agree.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about Drexel's urban strategy program as we kind of come towards our wrap up. And I want to thank our guests very much for being part of this urban strategy in the present tense series, where we talk a little bit about how we do urban strategy in the United States and in Philadelphia. And this is, if you're interested in this kind of work, this is the work we do every day at Drexel through the Nowak Metro Finance Lab, through the Lindy Institute, through the Urban Strategy Graduate Program. The Urban Strategy Graduate Program in particular is a 2-year master's program where if you go full-time and take 48 credits, you sort of immerse yourself into the world and the life of cities, learning things about civic engagement, learning things about economics, learning GIS mapping, learning quantitative and qualitative research skills, and basically charting your path through graduate school in a kind of intimate, thoughtful setting where you can learn how to be a problem solver in cities in the way that we aspire to create graduates like Bruce and Della. And we will be having a number of these webinars over the course of the winter and spring, where we'll have different guests joining us, and we want to invite you, as we will send you emails reminding you to register for upcoming sessions. But we'll also be having a information session on January 17th at 6 p.m. where you can learn more about Urban Strategy Master's Program at Drexel. I'm going to drop a link into the chat where you can join us that night and learn more about the work that we're doing at Drexel to try to kind of make a more just and equitable urban environment through attacking problems in a thoughtful and complex systems thinking kind of way, as our guests have done today. And I want to just kind of turn it back now to Bruce and Della as we come to a wrap up to say, if 52nd Street could sort of achieve its dream state, the state that we all hope for it, what would that look like to you? What would 52nd Street look like to you in 20 years or in 10 years, Della?
It would be in 3 pods. The first pod would be more retail, closer to the Market Frankfurt line at 52nd and Market. The middle would represent food and personal services and experience centers. And the other third pod would be arts and culture, right? To bring arts and culture to 52nd Street in a very meaningful way.
Can you say more about the arts and culture that you would imagine, as somebody who's a real devotee of the arts and culture in Philadelphia? What are you imagining would be the cultural mix on 52nd Street?
Well, as we look at housing in adjacent corridors and in neighborhoods, we don't want to see just affordable housing. What we'd like to do is similar to a couple of projects in New York, is to make affordable or moderate income housing for the arts and culture world, for dancers, sculptors, performers, so that they have a place And to use 52nd Street, because we have Malcolm X Park, which is about a 5-acre city park that could be used for rehearsals and just bringing life to the corridor. We also have a 45-year-old bushfire theater, and bringing that back and making that part of the arts and culture. So there's a number of things that we can do, art galleries, you know, many different opportunities to bring arts and culture to 52nd Street.
Well, I applaud you for that vision of enhancing community life and well-being through the arts. I think it's an essential ingredient. It can't all just be goods and services. We have to have that cultural mix as well.
Correct.
And Bruce, what would you like to see on 52nd Street if this Playbook investment prospectus takes off and is fully successful? What does 52nd Street look like to you?
Well, there's a lot of fascination in the urban planning field with the 15-minute city. And I do think, you know, that applies to certain portions of cities, particularly those that are well off. So if it's going to apply to these kinds of communities, then these corridors need to be seen as really not just commercial corridors, but civic centers for residents. You know, and you've got the park, which is a gathering place, needs improvement, needs refurbishment. But then you know, ideally there would be along the corridor, you know, enterprises that would be providing the kinds of goods and services that residents want. That's a 15-minute city. And I do think a lot of what we're trying to do here is say, okay, if we're serious about that in a post-COVID world, then we need to make the financing work and the strategies work for these kinds of communities. Otherwise, you know, the well-off communities will figure it out, right? I mean, that's not the problem. But these communities need a little bit extra. And in this moment, the feds are not really investing in this directly. The states have become, along with cities, but the states have become, you know, overseers of large amounts of capital. So if you want to tilt the playing field, you've got to, in a state like Pennsylvania, new governor, shifting political dynamic. Now's the time is to really begin to bring large amounts of capital to these communities, which have, you know, been bypassed for a long time.
Yes, I would say they've been bypassed, but they've also been resilient. They've also held their own. You know, these communities have not disappeared. They've managed to sort of survive, if not quite thrive, throughout the generations of disinvestment and white flight and all the other urban challenges that they've faced. And so I think we have both a moral duty and an economic and civic duty to return investment to these places so that they can thrive and shine for the people that have been living around these neighborhoods, as well as the new residents for so long now. And I think the work that the Enterprise Center and the work of the Nowak Metro Finance Lab is going to help us get there. I want to thank Della Clark and Bruce Katz, our guests on this edition of Urban Strategy in the Present Tense. It was wonderful speaking with you. I encourage everybody to visit your websites, to link up with you on social media, and to learn more about this work as it unfolds. Thank you so much for being with us today.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for having us, Andrew.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, bye all. Thank you.
Take care.